Good morning. It's about 5:36 a.m. Saturday, August 22nd here on the West Coast. And here is your last financial update for the week. We are going to go into this article. It's definitely more in depth. It's going to take longer, but I want to start with some idiotic news. Barstool Sports' Dave Portnoy dumps Bitcoin after claiming a $25,000 loss. If the headline is exactly what the article is about, then Dave Portnoy, you suck at trading crypto. Dude, seriously? Like, you just got in like a week or two ago and you're already out because it went down. Like, dude, you have the weakest hands I've ever heard. Dude, I've been in crypto for years and money comes and money goes, and as long as you don't sell, it comes back. Like, this is the weakest shit I've ever heard. Anyway, let's see what the article actually says before I rag on him further, and then maybe rag on him further. American internet celebrity Dave Portnoy has claimed to have exited the crypto space following a loss of $25,000. The Barstool Sports founder turned stock trader appears to have been prematurely stung by the high volatility of Bitcoin trading. Portnoy, who has recently expressed a lack of knowledge on crypto, tweeted a video on the 21st stating that he was getting killed on Bitcoin right now. Wonder if he actually did that just to drop the price a little bit. Was he is he doing some price manipulation to get back in, or is he actually reporting a loss and making himself look like an idiot? That's the question. In a follow-up tweet, the stock trader added that he just lost $25K and needed time to figure it out, just like the stock market. Here's the tweet. I currently own 0 Bitcoins. I will wait and watch. I lost $25K. Just like with the stock market, it took my brain time to figure it out. I know this. The Link Marines are weak and the orchid flowers do die in the crypto world. I may or may not be done. Stupid. Portnoy went on to mention Chainlink supporters, also known as Link Marines, labeling them as frauds, presumably because the asset has recently gone through a correction after hitting an all-time high. Showing yet more ignorance, the ranting continued in the video. Okay, guess there's a video. We don't need to do that. Quote, I don't need this. I know how the stock market works. I own the stock market. This Bitcoin, I don't trust this market at all. I may be out of it by the end of today and never come back. If Bitcoin people want to keep my money, you better get Bitcoin up today or else I'm effing out. Jeez. I mean, dude, you're in this, the stock market, then don't you know that you might want to be getting out of that soon too? I feel like Portnoy is, I doubt he'll be one left to hold the bags, but there's got to be a major sell-off coming in the stock market. The crypto community responded to the latter tweet, labeling the blogger as weak for not being able to tolerate the downsides of Bitcoin trading. Exactly. Full-time Bitcoin trader going by the handle Emperor added that this is what happens if you come to our world trying to act smart. Portnoy hosted the Winklevoss twins at his house earlier this month for some enlightenment on the crypto industry, during which he made a few trades on their Gemini exchange using the $250,000 he claimed to have sent to the exchange before the arrival. The most recent crypto-related tweet on Portnoy overactive feed says it all. I'm out on crypto because coins don't always go up. Stocks, on the other hand, continue to always go up. I mean, they do until they don't, Dave. And when they don't, they really don't. In my opinion, I hope I'm wrong about the stock market. I don't want America to fail. I don't want the job market to tank with the economy. Like, I don't, but it's just like, how can it not? Since tapping a 2020 high of around 12,400 on August 17th, Bitcoin has started to correct. Portnoy appears to have bought at the top of this current cycle and panicked when the asset started to pull back, which it has done countless times over the past decade. Seriously, dude. Looking at the bigger picture, Bitcoin is still up over 60% since the beginning of this year, so those with the staying power would still largely be in profit. Dude, yeah, man, maybe this isn't for you, Portnoy. But anyway, let's go into the main article. This is a good weekend article. It's long. The weekends, the markets aren't open except crypto. Crypto's 24/7, never closes, global market. But this is a really good article on Zero Hedge about CBDCs, in other words, central bank digital currencies. In other words, the newest way that the central banks are going to F us as hard as they possibly can. Many central banks are researching retail digital currencies, which if implemented would allow them to issue a new currency directly to the public, managed on a centralized ledger bypassing commercial banks. While there is an element of feeling the need to address new private sector currency developments, which threaten central bank monopolies, specific objectives are beginning to emerge. This article does not consider technology issues, confining its comments to the policy objectives identified in an IMF survey of central banks. It points out the dangers to individual freedom and why the application of a monetary policy extended to include central bank digital currencies are bound to fail. Good. Introduction. Fiat currencies are failing. For sure they are. Let's try something different. This seems to be the logic partly behind the feverish research by central banks into CBDCs. The central banks of the Bahamas, Ecuador, Ukraine, and Uruguay have conducted limited-scale pilot projects, and China is also reported to have planned trials through the Meiyuan Dianping, an online food retailer with two further Tencent-backed companies, though the status of these projects is at the moment unclear. These are retail CBDCs. With a retail CBDC, the central bank issues a new CBDC to the public, either through agents such as commercial banks or directly to the public, bypassing the current financial system entirely. That's what they'll do here in America, most likely. Or maybe not. They've got friends in commercial banks. We'll see. An advantage claimed over existing fiat is that it is capable of providing access through mobile technology to everyone, including the unbanked. But these advantages are already available through credit and debit cards and e-money stored in apps such as M-Pesa and Alipay. They work perfectly well, replacing the need for cash where cash is not necessarily available or desired by transacting individuals. Perhaps further development of these facilities could be seen to pose a threat to the fiat monopoly. Alternatively, a central bank might decide to authorize a synthetic CBDC, a privately issued digital money backed by central bank reserves, regulated and supervised by a central bank. In effect, the CBDC is contracted out to private sector partners, the full technological capabilities required lacking in a central bank. Furthermore, synthetic CBDCs are potentially cheaper, quicker to market, and may be less risky to implement. We shall assume for the purpose of this article that the monopolistic ethos of central banks rules them out and focus on directly issued CBDCs. Why they want CBDCs. The stated reasons for issuing CBDCs provide initial clarity to observers. According to a recent report from the IMF, the following objectives are under consideration. 1. CBDCs could enhance payment system competition, efficiency, and resilience in the face of increasing concentration in the hands of a few large companies. CBDCs, this is 2, may be a means to support financial digitization, reduce costs associated with issuing and managing physical cash, and improve financial inclusion, especially in countries with underdeveloped financial systems and many unbanked citizens. 3. CBDCs could improve monetary policy effectiveness to implement targeted policy or to tap more granular payment flow data to enhance macroeconomic projections. 4. An interest-bearing CBDC could enhance the transmission of monetary policy by increasing the economy's response to changes in the policy rate. Such a CBDC could be used to break the zero lower bound on policy rates. 5. CBDCs would also help reduce or prevent the adoption of privately issued currencies, which may threaten monetary sovereignty and financial stability and be difficult to supervise and regulate. 6. CBDCs could help improve traction of local currency as means of payments in jurisdictions attempting to reduce dollarization. 7. CBDCs could play a role in distributing fiscal stimulus to unbanked and other recipients. This list reads like a wish list, rather than one of the definitive policy objectives, but it is an insight into central bank thinking in its early stages. But given that a synthetic CBDC is almost entirely more efficient when implemented by specialist technology firms in the private sector, we can ditch the first objective, whereby a CBDC could offer competition to the private sector as little more than statist flannel. The other objectives are worthy of further discussion, at least from a central banker's point of view. Their point of view. Supporting financial digitization, reducing cash costs, and improving financial inclusion. Yeah, that's bad. Supporting financial digitization is little more than irrelevant nonsense and needs no further comment beyond the observation that in the absence of processing any entrepreneurial motivation, central banks would prefer their fiat monopoly not be challenged by financial digitization. As a means of limiting the expense of issuing cash, other means such as limiting withdrawals or banning cash altogether are more effective. It is only the last point mentioned in this objective that has a genuine rationale. As well as limiting or banning cash, by including unbanked citizens, more of a nation's GDP is captured, potentially adding to tax revenue and lifting a nation up global ranks by economic size. By replacing cash with a CBDC distributed to and held by mobile apps, sections of economic activity currently unrecorded become included in the GDP total. Thus, Indonesia, with its scattered communities spread over thousands of islands, could record a larger economy than Australia, This matters to politicians and policy planners. I'm telling you right now, if they actually do implement a digital dollar in the United States, the world is going to drop the US dollar as a reserve currency so fast. No one's going to want it. They're going to make it worthless. They're going to manipulate its price kind of like they do in China. It's going to become worthless. Improving monetary policy effectiveness. Presumably, the thinking behind this objective is that current monetary policy is failing for lack of control over economic actors while dismissing the possibility that monetary policy itself is flawed. Tapping more granular payment flow data to enhance macroeconomic projections is a desire to further monetary control, whereby a small committee of central bank officials can determine not just the quantity of money, but how and where it is distributed in the economy. Armed with this power, the economy can be micromanaged through capital allocation directed by the central bank. Some sectors, even individual businesses, will benefit at the expense of others, and it is a small step for industry to realize it must not only lobby the politicians, but with the politicians in tow, also lobby the central banks. Lobbying issues aside, for most statists, improving monetary policy effectiveness through greater control over free markets is their holy grail. It is the ultimate destination of Keynesianism. The reason for its lack of success in banishing the business cycle so far thought by policymakers to be due to lack of sufficient controls over outcomes, pulling the strings. An interest-bearing CBDC could enhance the transmission of monetary policy. On the assumption that a CBDC will circulate alongside existing fiat currency, it won't. In principle, it would have to reflect the same interest rate structure, but if its issuance is restricted to preferred sectors of the economy, like underrepresented groups when the Democrats get power, it might be possible for interest rates differentials to be maintained. In this case, policy planners could see a CBDC to be an important management tool. But for interest differentials to exist, strict limits would have to be placed on the ability for economic actors to arbitrage interest rates. Of course, what is meant by interest bearing is almost certainly the imposition of yet greater negative rates with the intention of promoting selected sectors or even individual businesses. The application of the Taylor rule, whereby a central bank sets interest rates with reference to the difference between the GDP deflator and the inflation target, is almost certainly behind current thinking. There appears to be a belief current among monetary policy planners that an economic shock leading to a fall in the consumer price index can be swiftly neutralized by deeply negative rates. If a CBDC circulating alongside fiat is the channel for deeply negative interest rates relative to those of the circulating fiat currency, then a CBDC could become a more effective policy conduit for economic recovery. Yeah, okay. I don't buy that. The use of a CBDC targeting consumers could probably incorporate another stimulative device by issuing them with a time-limited value or an expiry date. The incentive to spend would be enhanced and hoarding but all but eliminated. Furthermore, by directly issuing CBDCs to the general public, policy planners might assume they can fine-tune the effects on prices by varying the quantities in terms of the CBDC. Okay, this article is long. We're only halfway through, so if you're still here, buckle up, but I am going to finish it. CBDCs can discourage or prevent the adoption of private currencies. This objective envisages the current monetary arrangement of a state monopoly being undermined by competing currencies in the private sector. Privately issued currencies are not defined, but presumably include centralized e-money tied to fiat. Alipay and WeChat Pay are in this category, and their further development might raise problems for state monopolists, of course. Asset-backed stablecoins and crypto assets, such as Bitcoin, are seen as a more direct threat to fiat, and their development has informed a millennial tech-savvy generation about monetary policy currency debasement and the relative benefits of limited issue distributed ledger cryptocurrencies. That is such a good line right there. Asset-backed coins like Bitcoin are seen as a more direct threat to fiat, but their development has informed a millennial tech-savvy generation about monetary currency debasement. I mean, that is so true. I will have to say, if it wasn't for Bitcoin, I probably wouldn't know half the stuff that I know, and I'm no expert. So that's a good line. It is understandable that central bankers worry about developments in these areas and how they might threaten existing fiat currencies. This threat is possibly twofold: to a central bank's monopoly over circulating currency, and the potential for any one or combination of these categories to undermine monetary policy to the extent that they encourage fiat to be abandoned. The monopolist instinct in any state actor demands a policy to address the proliferation of e-money, stablecoins, and cryptocurrencies. The simplest response is to ban them all, but that horse is already bolted. Individual currency competitors can be closed down by regulating them out of existence, but to be effective, that requires cross-border cooperation, which usually takes years to obtain. That leaves one alternative: for the state to produce its own CBDC and to ensure as much as possible it circulates as money alongside fiat. But only a statist would think that by issuing a CBDC that economic actors would prefer it to private currencies. Markets decide these things, and the inflationary characteristics of a CBDC would, to a large extent, determine or undermine its rate of adoption as a circulating medium. Absolutely. They print money now out of nothing. They push a button, but can you imagine once they have the ability to do that digitally and put it directly into someone's bank account or into a large population's bank account? I'm thinking millions of underrepresented poor people here in the United States. Boom. Just like that, you're going to see your prices skyrocketing if you want to believe in inflation, and that's how the way things go. Reducing dollarization. No doubt all central banks with weak currencies believe that domestic use of the dollar to displace the local fiat currency is the principal cause of policy failure. The reasons for fiat failure and a flight into a more stable foreign currency are not hard to discern, even for central bankers grappling with this problem. Dollarization undermines the monopoly power of the central bank. Wherever dollarization features, it is understandable that the monetary authorities will explore the possibility of a CBDC resolving the issues arising from the circulation of the dollar in the domestic economy. Furthermore, from Venezuela to Argentina, from India to Zimbabwe, cryptocurrencies present an enormous threat to the state of control of money, a threat that central banks naturally believe must be addressed, and a monopoly for a CBDC could be seen to be part of the solution. CBDC used to distribute fiscal stimulus. Unless the government distributes a digital currency directly, which in the IMF paper is assumed to not be the case, the impact on fiscal balances from a CBDC must be through displacement, freeing a government from some of its existing spending commitments, right? Central banks, therefore, appear to be exploring variations on helicoptering money, and the distribution of fiscal stimulus should be examined in that context. They're helicoptering money now, folks. That means that's what they talk about when they're just printing money and giving it away in the form of stimulus, in the form of unemployment and payroll protection and all that. Oh my goodness. It's going to get so much worse. It's going to get so much worse. I cannot stress enough that you should own some gold and silver. If you're not into cryptos, I understand, but I'd say make that part of your portfolio. But gold, and just to kind of cut things, we're going to keep going, but gold closed on a little bit of a dip yesterday. Same with silver. Both are still looking very strong. We don't have to look at that later since we've looked there and the market's closed, but please get some silver eagles. Get the new kind. You don't have to go for collectors. Just go to like a JM Bullion or a Money Pay Direct or even your local silver and gold dealer and buy silver eagles. If you can only get one, it's $30. If you can get a stack of 20, even better. If you can get more, even better. But do it. Okay. A CBDC is assumed to be a liability of the central bank, shown as a balance sheet item alongside but separate from fiat money cash in circulation. To the extent the quantity of a CBDC is then expanded, balance sheet liabilities increase and have to be matched by an increase in assets. The current route to a central bank's balance sheet expansion cannot apply, whereby quantitative easing funds the government, increasing central bank balance sheet assets, and expands the reserves of commercial banks at the same time. Not sure if you guys just heard that, excuse me. Increasing balance sheet liabilities. Furthermore, CBDC bypasses the commercial banks. Now, who are the commercial banks in America? Bank of America, Chase, JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo. Do you really think that the central bank of the United States, Federal Reserve, is going to bypass the commercial banks? Somehow I don't think so. Somehow I feel like the guys who run those commercial banks are pretty much in on the central bank. I don't see that happening in the United States, but you never know. If it is banned from funding government spending directly, which is often the case, the central bank would have to find other means of acquiring assets to match the expansion of CBDC on the liability side of its balance sheet. The three-card trick will be to provide stimulus to the targeted individuals and businesses, release the government from that obligation by funding it with a CBDC, and to do so without undermining the fiat currency beyond the price inflation target through excessive monetary inflation. But monetary inflation is inflation, whether it is by fiat or CBDC, that's right. However, a central bank could decide to keep the issuance of a CBDC off its own balance sheet. A likely innovation would be to use it to fund a sovereign wealth fund under its control. That way, the appearance of inflationary financing would be a step removed from the public arena and directly associated with the state's creation of wealth for the common good. The monetary fallacies behind CBDC. So far, we have attempted to debate the benefits of a CBD from a central bank's point of view. Yes, in doing so, we have generally ignored the fallacies that had led them to consider embracing digital currencies. Here we go. Inevitably, critics of macroeconomic monetary policies are cast into the position of the Irishman, who, when asked the way to Ballymena by a motoring tourist, advised that he wouldn't start from here. The fashion for mathematical, state-driven, socialist macroeconomic theory is so pervasive in the corridors of power, central banks, commercial banks, and investment houses that an understanding of the genuine economic philosophy of human action by the establishment hardly exists. Like the Irishman, we are talking to an establishment that is lost on the wrong road. The multiple errors of macroeconomics, particularly with regard to the treatment of the means of exchange, have driven the establishment towards a collective economic destruction. That is now the overriding issue faced by monetary planners. The establishment has responded to its policy failures not through an unbiased examination and reassessment of its errors, but by turning its beliefs into a cult, like an antique religion that appeases its gods by the sacrifice on their altars of human lives. So what does that sound like, guys? It appears nothing will dissuade them from doubling down with yet more human sacrifices until all humanity is sacrificed in the name of preserving the establishment's macroeconomic beliefs. Oh yeah. The establishment is obviously now the enemy of its electorate, destroying private livelihoods and wealth through increasingly rapid debasement of the population's means of exchange. Buy gold, buy silver, buy crypto, they can't touch those ones. They can try to confiscate. It's a whole different topic. So hide it well and arm yourselves. Form communities. The very few operators who wield executive power over us and who increasingly discern the errors behind macroeconomic fallacies are now powerless to do anything about it for fear of precipitating the crisis they now fear. This is why we sensible men and women, when they are given power, conform. They lack the courage, are outvoted, or simply despair of changing status policies. There is no leadership against macroeconomic fallacies, and in any event, a brainwashed public wholeheartedly supports inflationism without appreciating the consequences. Dude, you wouldn't know. I know some really smart people who make really good money, and they think inflation doesn't exist. They literally think inflation doesn't exist. Oh, but the government always prints money, and we don't really see inflation. What was the price of a car in the 70s? What was the price of a house in the 80s and the 70s? What is that price of a house now? Do you really think the value of a dollar went up? No, it went down. Down, 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 down. You could get a house for $30,000. Now the house is $400,000. You could buy a car, own it outright, no debt, for $3,000 to $4,000, and now it's $30,000 to $40,000 for that same car. People don't understand that we've been living in gradual inflation for decades. I'm really glad they mentioned that. Brainwashed public wholeheartedly supports inflationism without appreciating the consequences. CBDCs are merely an extension of embedded inflationism, inflation by additional means. Some of the executives are dimly grasping the reality that their fiat currency will have to be inflated at such a rate that it could lead to its rejection as a means of exchange, unbacked by anything other than faltering confidence in a failing system. But because no one with executive power has the courage and authority to challenge the macroeconomics of aggregates and to rehabilitate economic theories based on the actions of individuals free of government intervention, a solution is being sought in new currencies. Involving CBDCs is one of the possible resets increasingly debated on policy fringes. Our focus, therefore, must be on the differences that might lead to a success of a CBDC where existing fiat has failed, and the first thing we should note is that, as proposed, CBDCs are another form of fiat, unless that is, a CBDC is gold-backed. But none of the literature emanating from the establishment suggests or even mentions a sound money objective. I mean, that would be cool. I mean, I don't know what the point of it being digital would be if it's going to be backed by gold, but way better. Sound money. money that just can't be printed or created out of thin air without the appropriate amount of precious metals backing it. That's generally sound money. Generally the way you would want to go. Judy Shelton, please save us all. We should therefore assume CBDCs will just be another form of inflationary fiat. I would also assume that. With respect to new technologies, the state always moves at a glacial pace. While we have identified trials in the Bahamas, Ecuador, Ukraine, and Uruguay with some reports of development in China, it will be years before CBDCs can possibly become mainstream. The principal weakness will be a centralized ledger, inevitably exposed to outside hackers from cyber-wearing states and criminals. The chances of the CBDC movement being stillborn are therefore high, particularly when one considers of the urgency of a policy solution to currency events. And the most important consideration of the benefits of CBDCs not mentioned anywhere is whether the general public actually wants them, because it will require their cooperation. For our empirical guidance, we can turn to a debate in Germany that first took place in the first few years of the 20th century. The new Austrian school of economics was pitted against the German historical school. The Austrians argued in favor of the general public choosing their medium of exchange, while the historical school, represented by George Knapp and the Chartist movement, argued in favor of the state theory of money. Bismarck seized the opportunity presented by Knapp's arguments to arm Germany through monetary inflation, which led to the First World War. The continuation of Chartist policies led to the collapse of the paper mark in November 1923. Predictably, after tolerating for some time, the German public had woken up to the fundamental weakness behind the state theory of money. Given the state the power over money, and it will abuse it. Now, give the state the power over money, and it will abuse it. Agreed. Yeah. Was that the Weimar Republic? Didn't we learn that after World War I, Germany's currency became completely worthless? Like, we've seen hyperinflation in many countries over time. It is an argument that resonates today, with fiat money being inflated as a catch-all solution to an economic mess of the establishment's own making. Let us turn to another example from history, which refers to a monetary asset with or without CBDCs. In December 1789, 5 months after the storming of the Bastille, France's National Assembly issued assignat bonds secured on sequestered church lands and bearing a coupon of 5% to pay off national debt. The intention was for the issue to be a one-off, but the temptation to issue more after declaring it as a currency the following year could not be resisted, and when the assignats had lost almost all their purchasing power after successive issues, the government then reset with a new currency in 1796, the mandats territoriaux, at the rate of 1 mandate for 30 assignats. The mandate became worthless within 6 months. If the establishment today was not so dismissive of pre-Keynesian classical economics, they might note that the replacement of one fiat currency for another, even bedecked with technological gubbins, is no resolution of the powers of the failures of the former. Agreed. Okay, we have the end of the article in sight here. Let's fucking get through it. Oh, excuse my language. The implications of CBDCs for economic power. We can describe any modern state's power as being in 3 buckets. There is the government itself, managed by a permanent establishment advising the political class. There is the central bank, responsible for managing the currency, ensuring the government is funded and exercising control over commercial banks. And then there are the commercial banks, licensed by government agents to expand credit out of thin air, freed from the charge of doing so fraudulently. The general public always thinks that the real power is held by the politicians, but that does not account for the control of money, the expansion of which is in the hands of the central bank and its commercial charges, who split the benefits of monetary seigniorage between them. It is assumed in the literature that the introduction of a CBDC will bypass the commercial banks entirely, unlike fiat cash, which is always distributed through them. It is clear from the objectives listed above, which are the result of an IMF survey of central banks concerning the research into CBDCs, that with the possible exception of synthetic CBDCs, there is no intention of retail CBDCs being distributed through the financial system. That being the case, there would be a transfer of power from commercial banks to the central banks, which is likely to be an additional reason for central banks being interested in the possibility of CBDCs being interested in it. Yeah, I'm still kind of dubious about that. I kind of feel like they're all the same players. Furthermore, central banks are increasingly aware that there are times when commercial banks are reluctant to expand bank credit when the risk factors increase, the very moment that central banks believe that monetary expansion is most needed. Consequently, commercial banks become obstructive to the deployment of monetary policies at those crucial times. A CBDC could be seen to be a resolution to this problem, targeted at stimulating consumption selectively. It could then be used to promote state-favored production and technologies. Not only are central banks contemplating forms of monetary asset, but they may be looking at radical changes in the financial system to enhance their power as well. Instead, the position of commercial banks could be undermined by the next systemic crisis, which, due to the accelerating rate of bankruptcies rising around the world from COVID-19 shutdowns and the bank's reluctance to lend, is likely to be imminent. Systemic dangers are without doubt more serious than at the time of the Lehman crisis, and having their origin in the non-financial economy, more far-reaching. Notwithstanding earlier promises of bail-ins, for which legislation has been passed by the majority of it, if not all G20 member nations, whole banking systems will most probably have to be bailed out by taking them into state ownership. And if this happens, then the benefits of the CBDCs to central banks that come from bypassing commercial banks will be nullified, because the effective nationalization of commercial banks will remove them as a separate base power and obstacle to delivering monetary stimulus. And by holding all the purse strings, central banks could become considerably more powerful than the government that originally sponsored them. You mean like right now? The Federal Reserve? It's probably more powerful than the United States government if you really think about it. I mean, I think Trump took it into the Treasury and technically is in charge of it now, but come on, really? We are finally at the conclusion. Central banks researching CBDCs are motivated by finding an additional means of monetary inflation to the existing means of issuing increasing quantities of fiat currencies. By issuing CBDCs directly to the public, commercial banks are bypassed, and central bankers hope to forensically target where the inflation is applied. A successful introduction of a CBDC could eliminate the impediment of contracting bank credit, which occurs at the end of every credit cycle. The further benefit for central banks is it will increase their power as an organ of the state at the expense of commercial banks, potentially becoming more important than the state itself. I've been telling you that I think that's already happened in most places. However, the current economic situation is deteriorating more quickly than a working CBDC can be introduced, so the whole exercise is likely to be too late to have any relevance to monetary policy in the foreseeable future. I hope they're right about that. I really do hope it's too late. Seriously. That is a super long article. I don't think I'm ever going to read an article that long. Maybe only on Saturdays when we have less to talk about, but not during the week. This is on Zero Hedge, a great website for kind of all things. I mean, remember that Twitter banned them at one point, so you know they must be speaking some sort of truth. And with that, if you haven't, please consider subscribing to this channel and also hitting the bell notification so you are notified of when I drop a new video, which is generally Monday through Saturday around 5:30 to 6 a.m. And the reason I ask, and I won't always ask, but I will right now, is because the channel is very young. It's very new. I mean, I think I have 16 subscribers, and I want to grow the channel out. So if you can do that, not only will you make sure to catch these videos, but you'll actually increase my chances of being discovered through organic searches and whatnot through the YouTube algorithm. So I really appreciate that. And with that, folks, have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you on Monday.